ahead of consequences on what concerns the engines and maintenance costs. Could you told us something about what could be done about labeling the vehicles about the contents of biofuels which could be used? As a matter of fact, Olliers would like to use even much more biofuels than are ruled by the governments. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for this question. May I assign this question to you, Alan, because you have already asked, okay, for the opportunity to respond.
Yes, but when I said that, I was anticipating that question, but I'll do my best to answer it. I mean, obviously, there are serious concerns about the environmental sustainability of biofuels. I mean, one form of biofuel which it seems to me is acceptable is the recycling of waste vegetable oils. And I know some large companies in the UK that use that in the tank, and they've gone up to 30%, even 50% mixes. And without too much difficulty. I mean, it's not as if their maintenance costs have risen very much. So I think if your question relates to what level of biodiesel can you put in the tank without damaging the vehicle and increasing your maintenance costs, then I think on the basis of some companies' experience, it could be 30 or 50%. But I would have to consult our vehicle manufacturers on that issue because they obviously have more technical knowledge. What I see as more of a constraint is just how much biodiesel is available, because regrettably we don't eat enough French fries anymore, so there's a limited supply of recycled vegetable oil, and if we then start to grow it using rapeseed or palm oil, then obviously there are lots of other concerns about the environmental damage that can do. But what I did want to do was to pick up some of the points that other people had made. First of all, some points from the discussants here. The first one I think related to the way in which companies calculate the CO2 emissions from their freight transport operations. There has been a proliferation of carbon calculators over the past couple of years. So I think there are software tools now available that companies can use for that purpose. I mentioned our Freight Best Practice program in Britain. That includes what they call a fuel-ready reckoner for hauliers, where hauliers can plug in various measures and get some estimate of how that would allow them to cut their fuel and cut their CO2. So I'm quite encouraged that there are these developments. One of the problems we have, of course, is that we have no agreed global standards on how you monitor and audit freight CO2. We've got the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, we've got ISO have come up with standards for auditing CO2, but arguably that's not specific enough really for the freight sector, and I think that work could certainly be elaborated. Interested in DHL's work, in a sense, the figure you quoted provides some corroboration for my 27% figure, though I think mine was perhaps a bit optimistic. But the point you said was that you're now factoring CO2 emissions into your logistics modelling work. What I'm interested in is how you then model the trade-offs between CO2 and monetary values when you're trying to decide how centralised a logistics system should be. How do you balance the economic and the environmental factors within that equation? I'd be keen to get your answer to that. The point that was made about the increase in oil prices, I think, was also interesting. The figures I have for the UK suggests that transport costs represent, on average, about 3 or 4% of the value of the goods across a range of sectors, a range of industries. Fuel costs represent about 30% of the transport costs. In other words, the fuel in the vehicles transporting the goods through the supply chain represent about 1% of the selling price of the products. So even quite high increases in oil prices, therefore, do not dramatically increase the final selling price of the product. The way in which oil prices affects inflation is through personal movement, it seems to me, rather than freight movement. And I'd be interested to get some reaction to that point. And then finally, the point about particulate matter being a greenhouse gas. I mean, I think the California Air Resources Board recently have included particulate matter as a greenhouse gas, so that confirms the point that you made. I'm not a chemist, but I understand the science is still a bit uncertain on that subject. Yeah? Okay, thanks. Yeah, okay.
Excuse me?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think there are still further questions waiting to be raised. Nevertheless, I should suggest that we turn now to the next topic area, which is on logistics and also voluntary activities which can be taken. And our next speaker is Barbara Lenz. She will introduce herself and will speak about the logistic point and about the potential how to reduce CO2 emissions by different logistic concepts and strategies.
Well, I just start by presenting myself when waiting for this slide. I'm Barbara Lenz from the DLR Institute of Transport Research. I'm head of this institute. DLR is the German Aerospace Center, which also deals with terrestrial transport. And at the same time as being a part of DLR, we are also part of ACTRI, which is the European Conference of Transport Research Institutes. And the aim of my presentation is to shed some light on optimization as one important factor to reduce goods transport CO2 emissions, as optimization reduces the volume of kilometers driven by trucks. You will have heard several times already today, and this will even continue, that all forecasts for freight transport are indicating a considerable increase on both national levels and the global level. As the IPCC scenario A1B indicates, this increase will be about 3 times for both heavy-duty as well as for light-duty vehicles. If we transform these forecasts into expectations for emissions, for CO2 emissions of the year 2030, we can see that CO2 emissions will have doubled, and the share of CO2 emissions in the total road transport coming from trucks will have raised from 35 to about 50%. As you may easily see by this map that was developed very recently by my colleagues, this change will be driven mainly by the rise of large economies in Asia, while the old, highly industrialized countries will still hold an important share in the production of CO2. On the national level, we may observe reductions of CO2 emissions in certain sectors of the freight transport. As for instance, in Germany, for the heavy-duty sector, which you see here on the slide on the right side, going, however, in parallel with a considerable increase in freight. You can see from the year 2002, the CO2 emissions decrease, while from 1991 to 2004, the performance of the heavy-duty trucks has increased by 55%. There are many components that have contributed in the last years to augment freight transport. Brought into a very simplifying formula, we may say that the past was mainly characterized by an increase in complexity of the production system, supported by an ever more sophisticated logistics system. In the recent past and in the present, we see important efforts to increase the efficiency not only of the production system, but of the logistics system, including the transport part of the system, although, as Alan already said, it represents a quite small part of the overall product costs. There are several indicators for this increased transport efficiency, as for instance, the growth in loaded distance for the German trucks. And if you look at the bottom line of this slide, you see this rate of loaded kilometers measured from 2000 to 2006. And you can see that this growth is not simply due to political measures like the introduction of a toll on motorways, but has started already in the years before to come up. We had the introduction of the toll for trucks on motorways from the beginning of 2005, and if you go back from there, you can see that the rate of loaded kilometers was already rising in the years before. To identify the future potential of CO2 reduction in the freight sector, my institute participated in a national project where we explored several scenarios to understand possible differences that may occur through the application of different strategies in the freight sector. The transport scenarios did not directly address the reduction of CO2, but the volume of transport generated by freight in terms of kilometers driven. The explorative scenarios are made in reference to a basic scenario, you could say to a business as usual scenario, which already takes into account the development that will occur with high probability anyway until 2030. Estimating the effects of economic change, which was one of the scenarios, mainly refers to economic political measures, while there is another scenario about optimized logistics, which takes into account several aspects that are estimated to allow for making the transport process more efficient. On the side of economic change and incentives, we took into account financial incentives for low-emission vehicles, increased fuel prices, the increase of toll and the lower tax for rail freight, while on the side of optimization of logistical processes, we took into account the improvement of telematic solutions in freight transport forwarder networks, the increase of the load factor, the increase of the market share of big forwarding enterprises, and more efficiency in contract logistics solutions. As was already pointed out also here in this round, there is a big lack of data. So the measurements and the model that we run on with these input are still on a very explorative basis. However, they go into, or they are consistent with what experts are assuming today. If we calculate with our model the difference of these two scenarios compared to the business as usual development, you can see that the scenario that assumes economic stimulation brings about only a relatively slight reduction in kilometers driven compared to the business as usual scenario. On the other hand, if we look at the scenario of optimization of logistics, we see a reduction of kilometers driven of about 10%. As a conclusion, I want to point out that we should take much more into consideration the potential that lies in the optimization of transport logistics. Of course, we cannot change the global economy, but maybe we can not rely, but try to foster, maybe even to give incentives from the political side to this optimization. However, and this optimization would concern a process that is not just occurring on the level of the firm, but which is occurring on the level of the corporation of firms. However, we should not forget about the improvements that can be made, of course, by the other areas, for example, in the area of technologies, as my colleague from Scania already pointed out. Economic stimulation may also help, and we need to take further into account the need for modal shift to rail, intermodal transport, and short sea shipping. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Barbara, for introducing us into the potential of different logistic concepts for reducing CO2. And as you have seen, as soon as CO2 reduction is becoming a firm's company objective, then it is possible to explore this potential to a wide extent. Now we come to the preconditions which have to be fulfilled, okay, for bringing the firms to these ideas and to contribute, say, voluntarily to these strategies. And this is the main point of the presentation of Erik from Agtmaal. And the floor is yours, Erik.
Yes, okay. I'm managing partner of the Green Logistics Consultants Group, but my next page is about that. So I prefer to wait, okay. Okay, what we do is actually just 1 minute about our group. Is actually we are an international, worldwide, actually collaborative network of consultants, also of also some researchers, and we help mainly companies to improve the environmental performance of their supply chains. But some of our partners are also working for governments, European Commission, etc. And we focus on, and that's important and repeatedly said here, we focus on the measurement, on a correct measurement of greenhouse gas emissions, but also on emissions, other air contaminants such as NOx, sulfur, etc., caused by logistics activities. And as well, we exchange information and develop tools, etc., regarding the solutions. And we make actually a difference between transport avoidance strategies, operational solutions, and technological solutions. But our focus as a group is mainly on operational and transport avoidance. We've got actually members of partners in the United States, mainly in Europe. The largest part are in Europe, but also in Australia, Malaysia, and New Zealand. I would like to focus on one aspect that I described in my paper, because it's indeed a very important one, and that's quantifying emissions at a firm level. Why is it important? Because quantifying emissions provides the baseline from which emissions reduction strategies can be developed and performance can be measured over time. And it allows companies to set goals, to understand the trade-offs between choices, and to optimize their mode of freight transport. We focus actually on supply chain, and in our interpretation of, in our definition of supply chain, it is limited to the movement, storage, and handling of goods, and that's indeed only one part, as said before, of a total life cycle study. But nonetheless an important one. If you quantify emissions of supply chain, actually we don't compare the emissions of a ship with another ship, or a ship with a train, or a vehicle with an airplane. No, we compare the emissions of a total supply chain, and in this case it's a supply chain where a ship is the main transport mode to transport it. But before that, you have also transport to the ports, and from the ports to other factories or to a retailer. So you have to take that into account. And on the other side, you have got also your transport back. In some cases, some capacity is not used. It's used. You've got return trips sometimes, or in a lot of cases, you've got also empty containers, etc., as well as a load factor. And that can have a large impact on the, if you compare emissions of supply chain. In the Netherlands, a study has been done some years ago, actually financed by you, I think. Yeah. That was in English, to shift or not to shift, that's the question. And that was a study by a Dutch research institute, CE Delft. And they have actually come to a lot of interesting conclusions that you wouldn't expect. And recently they have done a study, actually an update of this study. Pity with this study is that it is only available in Dutch, so I hope that you will translate it. Okay, they will translate it, and actually they compare the emissions of supply chains and of the different transport modes, but taking into account also transport before and after, also taking account some kind of the engines efficiency, load factors, etc. And you see, and it's obvious that in the case of individual companies, the variation in outcomes are certainly larger than you see here. But one interesting thing about this study is, for example, that sea transport for short shipping is not that good that you would expect, and the same is true actually for inland shipping. And the situation is totally different if you compare other emissions such as PM10, where sea transport, short shipping is not at all good. But that's mainly related to fuel use, I think, by the shipping industry. What you see in general, if you use calculation tools, is a large difference between outcomes. And that applies for internet-based available calculation tools, but also for tools developed or that you can buy, so more supply chain related tools, management tools, modeling tools that you can buy in the market. You find inconsistencies in available data, and you find also differences in results of more in-depth research. An example is actually the difference between two studies in Belgium. It was actually a study, one study was ordered, or the studies were ordered by different public authorities to different research institutes. And they made that study independently from each other. One study, so study A came to the result of, so for the emissions from seagoing vessels in the Belgian waters, including the ports. They came to a result of 1,849 kiloton CO2 per year. What would you think that the difference would be with the second study? 5%, 10%, 15%, maybe 30%? 720 kilotons, so the difference is huge. And you find the same differences certainly if it is related to the emissions per weight, mass, distance, or ton kilometer. There, the differences are even larger. So it's obvious that there is a large need for international procedures, so common procedures and data, and the advantage is obvious. It would facilitate for also companies to launch logistics environmental initiatives. If you know how to do it, if you know where you can find data, it's much easier. Also, exchange of environmental data within supply chain, because if one company uses another methodology than its suppliers, then you've got a problem today. Measurement of progress, that's obvious. Verification, third-party audits, because today with all the differences in methodologies, actually a company can prove whatever it wants. Benchmarking opportunities, that's absolutely not possible today. But also, if you want to, in your purchasing policy, want to involve your suppliers can then meet also environmental requirements. Integration also of standard environmental data into supply chain modeling management applications. And this establishment of voluntary emission registries. That's not only important for companies, but it's also important for public policy making. Because today it's quite impossible or very difficult to measure the impact of voluntary emissions projects today. But if companies use a more common methodology, and if they report that the results of their policies into one registry, you can use that for scientific research. You can use that also for public policy making to measure things. And as a last one, also you can introduce it for certification and labels. Although personally, I don't think that these are that efficient. There are today a lot of standards and data, more also related to mobile sources. You find data from ISO, of our methodology, ISO 14064, related to emission not restricted to mobile sources, but also other emission data from IPCC, etc. Also very interesting data books from the European Environment Agency. But that's today not enough, I have to say, and too limited to for the logistics market. And you've got also some procedures to develop today related to total life cycle greenhouse gas emission of goods, such as also ISO, but also in the UK, a publicly available specification is now under development. Some recent initiatives, I think in the United States, the Environmental Protection Agency is working on it. They also they work on a model that can be also incorporated into existing commercial logistics software. NTM in Sweden, it's also one of our partners is leading that organization, but that's an organization where companies such as Volvo, Ericsson, so the Swedish industry are part of it, and actually a front runner in this field, I think, and they have developed very interesting models. And then we've got in the Netherlands, Connect. That's also a public-private initiative made of several governmental bodies, companies and knowledge institutes. What specifically, and it's also the NTM is, as I said, a private or members of private companies, but they have come to the same conclusions. And what is typical for these three organizations, and there are certainly examples in other countries, that they have a good, or they have created a good cooperation between public policy and the industry. So they try to develop innovative solutions together, and that's very important. And still in Europe, there are still organizations, I think, that are too much isolated from the industry. So good cooperation, coordination is important. Related to the emissions, how to measure emissions and data, I think what is needed is better coordination between all kinds of organizations, and not only related to procedures, but also related to data and data availability. As a company, you want to use, you want access to data, easy access to data. I think not only related to CO2 or greenhouse gases, but also to other pollutants such as NOx, SO2 and PM10 and others. I think that the input from national data sources will be and will remain important, because today a lot of environmental protection agencies, local environmental agencies have already a lot of data. Some of them have to be adapted to a more corporate, before you can use it at a corporate level, but nonetheless, there is a lot of data. And it has to be consistent, and there we still have a problem, maybe less in the CO2, but certainly if you talk about other more traditional pollutants, a lack of consistency. You have to work on that, and it has to be consistent with also other guidelines and procedures. My recommendation to the Minister of Transport, only specifically for this topic, is that it is important to avoid differences in current procedures and in the development of procedures for calculating emissions. Also avoid duplication in research. That's a more general remark. Improve coordination and cooperation with the aim of sharing information and data. And I think you have to do it at really a global level. I think, and this is you can't do it without this, I think. For CO2 at country levels, you've got the IPCC. I think for transport, logistics activities, also for cooperation, you need actually some kind of IPCC for the consolidation and also for the dissemination of common procedures and data. There are several initiatives in this field, also where already several international organizations are discussing this. So if you talk with organizations, many or everybody is actually in favor of this initiative, but it has to start, it has to be created, and has to be funded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erik, for introducing us to this very important field. You also mentioned that cooperation is very important on the field of logistics, and I have the feeling that until now every firm, every company is trying to optimize their logistics in a standalone way, not considering that there are also other companies with whom they could consolidate their transport activity, and this could create a potential indeed for the reduction of vehicle miles in the future and also of CO2. Now let me give the discussion free for our discussants at the panel. Would you like to intervene?
Yes.
Willem?
I appreciated very much the presentation of Barbara Lenz because we, and also being a CEO of a logistics company, see a very big potential in optimizing the logistics processes and the better utilization of vehicles. She mentioned load factors like 80%. It depends a little bit on long haul, short distance, but like I say, we have our own numbers, and there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of fuel burned, which is not necessary. And I'll give you an example. If you look at the distribution to cities, so not only the long haul, where of course other modalities compete, and I think very well, but if you talk about short distance, all the deliveries into cities, let's first avoid that they're sitting in a traffic jam just burning fuel for nothing. So we're talking in the Netherlands much more about also night deliveries, so keeping those vehicles out of the very busy periods. Secondly, realize they all are going full into the cities and they're coming back half empty, back to the distribution centers. And there is a big potential, we think, to cooperate and to find innovative solutions. And thirdly, what we have experienced is the advanced planning systems to optimize the logistics processes have brought an enormous positive effect, and we advise to further stimulate innovation to come with very advanced systems to optimize the whole logistics process. So thank you, Barbara.
So first of all, I fully agree with what Willem is saying, so I won't repeat myself now. Rather, I give a comment to what Erik has been saying. So I fully agree with what you are saying, that we need kind of standards in calculating emissions, also to remain credibility in the market. So as I stated previously, we are aiming for quite an ambitious target, and in order to reach credibility, that calculations need to be based on certain standards. Otherwise, there will be a lot of questions. On the other hand, you mentioned the ISO 14064 standard and NTM, and that's what we are applying already today. And we also, for 3 years now, we have involved an independent third party to look through our calculations, through our books, to prove that what we are doing is credible, and it seems to be sufficient for today. On a midterm basis, we want to share the responsibility with our subcontractors. So we, within DHL, and I believe with many other logistics providers, we are using a lot of subcontractors, and we only are able to reach our 30% emission targets if subcontractors contribute to this target. And here we need transparent calculation methodologies to place a certain burden also on our subcontractors. So fully agree with what you are saying, Erik.
Further comments from the panel? This is not the case. Then I give the discussion free to the floor. Who is the first? To the left. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Theresia Hackstein, and I'm representing the European Barge Union, which is the representative of the barge owners associations in Europe. I have learned today that the speakers feel that reduction of emissions is both of strategic and technological influence, and I fully agree mainly with Mrs. Johansson, who told us that a better making use of logistic chains and better integration, cooperation within this chain would make would lead us to some reducing of emissions. In this respect, I also stress that inland navigation is by far most the energy efficient mode of transport. Regarding former studies we had, to which Mr. van Agtmaal also referred to, the study Shift to Shift or Not to Shift showed and proved that inland navigation is using less energy than all other modes of transport. Referring to his latest report and study he was mentioning, I was wondering, when speaking about standards of measurements, whether in the energy consumption of an end emission out of the railway, it has been taken into account, which mainly uses electricity, the outcome or the coming from the electricity has been taken into account, because we all do know that to a very high extent they mostly come from the power plants. But this is only a question. I would like to make 2 remarks on the overall discussion. First of all, you already mentioned that inland navigation is also not that energy and consumption friendly, mainly due to the very low standard of the fuel, and I would like to draw your attention to the directive of the European Commission, which has recently been released, and according to which the fuel, the sulfur fuel, would be highly decreased, and our industry very much welcomes this initiative, and even more, we are not in favor of a reduction in 2 steps. We are in favor of a reduction in 1 step from 1,000 to 10 ppm in 1 single step and all over Europe. So I think this is an improvement for our industry as well, and which will lead to an even better, let us say, a scale of inland navigation in that field of energy consumption and emission reduction. But I also would like to draw your attention to 2 best practices. First of all, a best practice of a vessel which is to be claimed the world's cleanest diesel-powered inland vessel, which is making use of very low sulfur diesel, state-of-the-art propulsion engine, a catalytic reduction, and particle mass filter. And the outcome of this pilot project is to be viewed every day on a web-based screen. And a second best practice regarding inland navigation is the spatial planning of the Rotterdam port, which, for instance, for meeting the environmental criteria, made use of some 40% inland navigation. And I think this is also what proves that a modal shift would lead to a better, let's say, overall proportion and reduction of emission. Thank you.
Okay, let us compile several questions, please.
I will present myself. I'm Willy Bonting from Belgium Railways, the Belgium railway operator, of course, responsible for environmental matters. So it has been mentioned that modal shift to other modes, especially railways, but I'm not opposite, of course, of also a shift to inland shipping when available. And lower taxes is a policy that had to be made. As we all know, transport is not included in ETS. So that means that there is no, at the moment, there is no direct regulation to transport, and especially freight transport, to lower their carbon emissions. There will be, in the future, from 2012, post-Kyoto, when this is adopted, of course, the freight transport will also have to contribute to the lowering of the national targets. For Belgium, for instance, is minus 15%. But in the meantime, rail is, in fact, included in ETS, because major part of rail traction is done by electric traction, and the electricity production centers are, of course, included in ETS. And we see our costs for electricity are about 10% higher because of this effect. And I would, of course, rather, when this money has to be spent, I would like to spend it to improve our own energy efficiency. So I would like to know from the panel what suggestions we should do in order to compensate the situation.
Thank you. Please. Next question.
Thank you very much. My name is Miguel Palomares. I work for the International Maritime Organization, which, as you know, regulates international shipping. Much has been talked, in particular by the last speaker, about the importance of international transport by sea in the transport chain as a whole. Also, there have been comments about the quality of the fuel that ship use, etc. I thought the workshop should know that the IMO is about to enact legislation through the MARPOL Convention that will tighten progressively the emission of sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, and ozone-depleting substances, which are prohibited on board. So this will lead us in a progressive way to 2020, where ships will not be able to burn fuel with more than 500 parts per million or 0.5 or 5% sulfur contents. This, I hope everybody agree, is going to be a very significant step in this sense. On a parallel path, the IMO is working very, very intensively on measures to reduce CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gases from ships. And this will lead to a regulatory framework that we expect will be adopted next year in July, regulating the CO2 emissions from ships. I will be very happy to expand on this should the need arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question to the left, please.
My name is Angelo Martino from TRT Italy. My question is related to the presentation of Barbara Lenz, and is also related to what already Professor Aleklet asked. And it's, how would be the impact of these two scenarios that have been analyzed in a context of significantly rising price of oil, like the one that we are facing, in a context where companies will be under pressure of the increase of fuel cost, which of course is a part of the cost of transport, but will be relevant. So the simulation that we have done with the Astra model in a project that we are doing for the European Commission from DG RTD on the impact of high cost of oil on the transport system show that there will be also a reduction of transport activity. Not a significant one, but will be anyway a reduction, not marginal. So we have to reconcile from the one side the fact that there will be less revenues, and so there will be the need for the policy for the governments to raise money. On the other side, there will be the pressure already on logistics, on optimization for the hauliers, for the companies. So the question is for everybody on the table how to to solve this conundrum.
Okay, so let me conclude this round of questions from the floor. You will have the opportunity to raise additional questions in the final round of our panel. But now I think it's time to respond in a very brief way to the questions from the floor. I think there are three categories. Were questions with respect to the efficiency of maritime transport and inland waterways. There was a question from the railway side, and there was a question directed to Barbara Lenz with respect to the estimation of the logistic potential, or of the potential of logistic changes, and comparison of the different modeling approaches for doing such estimations. So who would like to be first with responding? Willem?
I would like to respond to the question about trains and intermodality from, I think, NMBS. The logistics industry is very much in favor of looking to other modalities. We also are continuously looking at shifting goods transports from roads to, for instance, inland waterways and trains. it's not so much a matter of cost for us, it's a matter of inflexibility. So let me put it positive. If the liberalization of the railways in Europe takes place, I think that can give a very better way of flexibility and working with the railways, transit times, for instance, with the railways, and also efficiency. So if that takes place, I think we should consider that one. I think we will have more and more goods shifting to the other modalities. So it's not a matter of CO2 only, it's not a matter of cost, we're looking for the similar type of service as road transport has. That's why we have so much road transport. It's so flexible, it's so service-oriented, it's fast.
Okay, so I think it's a matter of organization, and also the loading factor for the railways can still be increased. It's not so much a matter of propulsion technology rather than, say, better loading factors and better organization in the sector. Okay, next response, please.
Well, I would like to first to respond to your more technical questions about the difference between energy carriers and energy sources, and whether the energy sources and emissions of energy sources has to be taken into account. And it's obvious that has to be taken into account if you want to compare different transport modes and the effects of it. In the studies I refer to, the whole energy conversion chain has taken into account. Your first remark was actually about the potential effect of more collaboration, coordination in logistics. I think that first of all, the parties that had the largest impact on consolidation is actually the logistics services industry. Companies as DHL and your competitors are working or are earning their money by consolidating freight. That's one remark. But if you look at shippers, it's obvious that much more can be done. And you find very good examples of collaborative networks in the UK, in the Netherlands, and in several other countries, where retailers as well as manufacturers started to work together within the chain or consolidated their chain, sometimes competitors, and I personally have been involved in several of these projects. And I have to say, in the case where the initiative came from the industry itself, it often resulted in very large effects. And with large effects I mean, 20-30% reductions. I've also have been involved also in cases where the initiatives were taken by public, funded by public money, and in that cases it didn't result always into the effects. So you see that this kind of initiatives are, I think, better done by the industry itself and can be backed by government and public agencies. But if it is only based on public funding, it's not. It doesn't result often into good results. About the sea transport I think that the IMO is, in principle, the best platform to come to an agreement about reductions and that kind of requirements. But so far, if you look at the results are poor. So, and I think also that if the IMO will not come with really concrete actions, then actions will be taken more on a unilateral basis by the European Commission, by the United States, by California, the state of California, as it has been done today.
Okay, thank you.
The assessment, the modeling assessment that we made was made for Germany, and it was made in a framework that had expectations on relatively low increase in oil prices. So we expect if the oil prices and the fuel prices rise considerably, this will have effects on both the economic, or would have effects on both the economic scenario and the optimization scenario. But I would like still to pick another point that Mr. Wegner made. He was talking about the transparency from the subcontractors to DHL in your case. And I think this is a very important point. in a market that you see, as it is in Germany, with many subcontractors, that the big firms have a great responsibility for introducing measures, but also measurement of CO2 emissions and effects of projects to reduce these emissions.
Okay, I think this was a very lively debate, and we will continue the debate, so I ask for your patience a little bit. If you would like to give additional interventions, then I suggest to do that after the break, which I announce now. We will have a break of 15 minutes. That means we meet again at 5 o'clock, and then we will be going to prepare the basic messages to the ministers and to the political side. So we meet again at 5 o'clock in this room. Thank you.